The dark origins of your favorite Disney movies, now with a tier list. The Little Mermaid. Disney's The Little Mermaid tells the story of Ariel, a young mermaid who dreams of life on land. She makes a deal with the sea witch, loses her voice, undergoes a magical transformation, and ultimately wins Prince Eric's love, happily ever after. But the original story by H.C. Andersen, it's a dark tragedy of pain and sacrifice. In the original, the mermaid's longing isn't just for love, it's for a human soul. Mermaids live for hundreds of years, but when they die, they simply vanish into sea foam. Humans, however, are granted eternal souls. To obtain one, a human must love her, and she him, binding a piece of his soul to hers. After saving the prince's life and falling in love with him, the mermaid decides that she wants to be human. She seeks out the sea witch. The cost? Excruciating pain, and her tongue. Oh, and she must marry the prince. If not, she will dissolve into sea foam the morning after his wedding. The mermaid accepts, leaving her family and former life behind. When she drinks the sea witch's potion, it feels like a sword is piercing her body. Every step she takes on land feels like walking on knives, and her feet bleeds terribly. She is taken in by the prince, and dances for him despite the unbearable pain. But he never falls in love with her. Instead, he marries a princess, believing she's the one who saved him. The sea witch offers the mermaid a way out, and her sisters brings her the tool, a dagger. If she kills the prince and let the blood drip on her feet, she can return to the ocean. But she cannot get herself to kill the man she loves, so she throws herself into the sea, dissolving into foam. And yet, Andersen offers a final twist. Instead of disappearing, the mermaid becomes a daughter of the air, earning a second chance. If she does good deeds for 300 years, she will finally receive a soul. Pinocchio. Disney's Pinocchio is a story of growth and redemption. A wooden puppet, eager to be real, learns the values of honesty and bravery. Sure, he stumbles. Pleasure Island, Stromboli, a monstrous whale. But with Jiminy Cricket guiding him, he proves himself worthy and earns his humanity. But in Carlo Collodi's original Pinocchio, there was no happy ending. Pinocchio isn't just mischievous, he's rotten. From the moment Geppetto carves him, he mocks and mistreats his creator. He steals, lies, and ignores every warning. And his first encounter with the talking cricket? He smashes it with a hammer. Geppetto teaches Pinocchio to walk, and he immediately runs away, which gets Geppetto arrested for allegedly mistreating the puppet. When Geppetto is finally released, he sells his only coat to buy Pinocchio a schoolbook. But does Pinocchio go to school? Of course not. Instead, he gets into even more trouble. He sells the book to get a ticket for a puppet show. He is nearly burned alive, and later nearly fried in a pan. And then, his choices finally catch up to him. He falls in with two criminals, the fox and the cat, who lead him deep into the woods. There, they bind his arms, slip a noose around his neck, and hang him from a tree. Pinocchio is dead. The end. Or at least, that's how it was supposed to end. Collodi originally intended the story of a puppet as a warning against bad behavior, but readers protested they wanted more. His publisher pressured him to continue the story. So Collodi pulled a deus ex machina, introducing the blue fairy to save Pinocchio. From there, his misfortunes continue. He turned into a donkey, he nearly drowned, and was later swallowed by a monstrous fish. But this time, he changes, he learns, he sacrifices, and finally, after proving himself, he becomes a real boy.
Not a puppet, I'm a real boy!
Snow White. Disney's Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs is a classic fairy tale of good triumphing over evil, a jealous queen, a poisoned apple, and a true love's kiss that brings Snow White back to life. But in the original Brothers Grimm story, there is a bit more torture and cannibalism. The queen isn't just vain, she's a monster. When the magic mirror tells her Snow White is more beautiful, she orders the huntsman to carve out her lungs and liver and bring them back as proof. Oh, and she also intends to eat them. The huntsman spares Snow White, who finds refuge with the dwarfs. But the queen doesn't just try once, she tries 3 times to kill her. First, she laces Snow White's corset so tight that she suffocates. The dwarfs cut her free just in time. Next, she places a poisoned comb in her hair, knocking her unconscious. Again, the dwarfs save her. Then comes the apple. This time, Snow White doesn't wake up. The dwarfs place her in a glass coffin, believing she is dead. But forget the true love's kiss. The prince has nothing to do with her revival. In the Grimm version, the prince becomes so obsessed with her that he carries the coffin everywhere. That is, until one of his servants, fed up with carrying her around, smacks Snow White on the back. The jolt dislodges the poisoned apple from her throat, and she wakes up. The prince, overjoyed, promptly asks her to marry him. A confused Snow White accepts. And the queen? She doesn't just fall off a cliff. At Snow White's wedding, she tries to kill Snow White once again. The prince, fed up with her antics, forces the queen to wear burning hot iron shoes and dance until she collapses and dies. Sleeping Beauty. Disney's Sleeping Beauty is a tale of romance and magic. A princess cursed to sleep for 100 years, awakened by true love's kiss. The evil fairy is vanquished, and Aurora dances into her happily ever after. And for once, the Brothers Grimm version is nearly identical. Their little Briar Rose follows the trajectory: royal birth, a curse, spindle, century-long sleep, and a prince arriving just in time. Good job, Disney. Well, except for one thing. The Grimm tale isn't the original. It's based on a French fairy tale by Charles Perrault. And Perrault? He borrowed from an even older and darker Italian story called Sun, Moon, and Talia by Giambattista Basile. At Talia's birth, astrologers predict that her downfall will come from a splinter of flax. Terrified, her father bans all flax, hemp, and spinning materials from the kingdom. But one day, a peddler woman, completely unaware of this royal decree, spins flax right outside the castle. Curious, Talia invites the woman into the castle. She touches the spindle, gets a splinter under her nail, and immediately drops dead. Heartbroken, her father abandons her body in a distant palace and leaves her there. Then, one day, a king from a neighboring land stumbles upon her. Struck by her beauty, he tries to wake her. When that fails, he carried her to a bed where he gathered the first fruits of love. Yeah. 9 months later, Talia gives birth to twins, Sun and Moon. One of the babies, trying to nurse, sucks the flax splinter from her finger. Talia awakes and is happy but confused to see her children. Then, Mr. Predator returns. He sees Talia awake and casually explains what he did. Instead of her running away screaming, "Their friendship was knitted with tighter bonds." Okay, sure, Basile, why not? The king stays with Talia for a time before he has to return home to his wife. His wife, suspicious of his constant hunting trips, discovers the truth. Furious, she orders the children to be kidnapped and cooked into a meal for her husband. Luckily, the cook hides the children and serves the king some lamb instead. Next, the queen sends for Talia. She accuses her of stealing her husband and orders her to be burned alive. The greedy queen, coveting Talia's fine garments, orders her to remove her clothes first. With every piece of clothing, Talia cries out in grief. The king hears Talia's screams and goes to her, where his wife tells him that Talia will be burned and that he has unknowingly eaten his own children. Enraged, he throws his wife into the fire. The cook is next in line, but surprise! He reveals that he saved the children. Everyone rejoices. Talia and the king marry, and the cook is rewarded. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how you write a fairy tale. The Hunchback of Notre Dame. Disney's The Hunchback of Notre Dame is one of its darkest films. Religious corruption, cruelty, and persecution, all wrapped in stunning animation. But in the end, justice prevails, Quasimodo triumphs, and the villains fall. However, Victor Hugo's original 1831 novel does not offer a happily ever after. Quasimodo is still a deformed, half-blind bell ringer of Notre Dame, abandoned as a baby and raised by the cold and obsessive archdeacon, Claude Frollo. Like in the movie, Frollo becomes consumed with lust for Esmeralda, a young Roma dancer. When she rejects him, he tries to have her executed. Quasimodo also falls in love with her, but to Esmeralda, their relationship is strictly platonic. Her heart belongs to Captain Phoebus, a handsome soldier. But in Hugo's version, Phoebus is a womanizer who only toys with Esmeralda's feelings. One night, Frollo stabs Phoebus in a jealous rage, and Esmeralda is blamed. Tortured, she confesses to a crime she didn't commit and is sentenced to death. Frollo offers her a way out: submit to him or die. She chooses death. Quasimodo rescues her from the gallows and hides her in the cathedral under sanctuary. But Frollo breaks in and tries to assault her. Failing that, he traps her with a reclusive nun, who turns out to be Esmeralda's mother. Her baby was stolen and replaced with a deformed child, which explains how Quasimodo ended up at the cathedral in the first place. An unwanted Roma baby switched with the only friend he ever had. The two women share a brief, joyful reunion before the king's men arrive. Her mother clings to her all the way to the gallows. When she is thrown aside, she dies from the fall. Esmeralda is hanged. Quasimodo, heartbroken and enraged, throws Frollo off the cathedral to his death. With nothing left to live for, Quasimodo vanishes and is never seen again. Years later, two skeletons are found in the charnel house, locked in an embrace, implying that Quasimodo had sought Esmeralda among the decaying corpses and laid down to die while holding her. When separated, the bones crumble to dust. Tarzan. Disney's Tarzan is a story of adventure, love, and self-discovery. A boy raised by apes, torn between two worlds, ultimately choosing the jungle and the woman he loves. It's heartwarming and, of course, completely sanitized, because the original 1912 novel, Tarzan of the Apes, by Edgar Rice Burroughs, is brutal, tragic, and much, much darker. Tarzan's aristocratic parents, John and Alice Clayton, are marooned on the African coast. They manage to build themselves a wooden cabin in the jungle. However, a year later, Alice dies of insanity, leaving John to raise their infant son alone. Then, the apes attack. In the novel, Kerchak isn't a grumpy father figure. He's a bloodthirsty killer. He murders Tarzan's father and turns on the child. But Kala, a grieving she-ape who lost her own child, snatches the human baby and raises him as her own. She names him Tarzan, White Ape. Tarzan doesn't grow up swinging to Phil Collins bangers. He's an outcast, constantly fighting for survival. Smaller and weaker than the apes, he relies on his intelligence. Finding his parents' cabin, he teaches himself to read and write English, and he learns how to use tools. He begins to understand that he is a human, which makes him feel superior to his ape family. However, when his adoptive mother is killed by a local African hunter, Tarzan hunts and torments the tribe, stealing their weapons and killing them for sport. The tribe fears him as a vengeful spirit. Later in the story, Tarzan kills his foster father Tublat, and later he killed the lioness, Sabor. Tarzan's bragging sends Kerchak into a furious rage, so Tarzan offs him too. Tarzan then takes his place as king of the apes. He is a just ruler, but everything changes when Jane arrives. She is marooned with her father and Tarzan's cousin, William Clayton, after a mutiny over lost treasure. Tarzan saves her multiple times, and she falls for him in the jungle. But when she's rescued and returns to America, everything changes. Determined to follow her, Tarzan finds the Spanish treasure, saves a Frenchman, and travels to America. But civilization is another world. When Tarzan reunites with Jane in Baltimore, she is hesitant. The wild man who once saved her isn't as intriguing in a suit and tie. Just before he confesses his love, Jane accepts Clayton's proposal. Then comes a letter. proof that Tarzan is the true lord of the estate. If he speaks up, Clayton loses everything. But Tarzan says nothing. Instead, he lets Jane go, lets his cousin keep his fortune, and walks away from his inheritance, his name, and the woman he loves. Hercules. Disney's Hercules is a light-hearted adventure. A baby stolen from Olympus, raised on Earth, and destined to become a hero. With strength, charm, and a catchy soundtrack, he defeats Hades, rescues Meg, and earns his place among the gods. But the original Greek myth? It's a story of madness, murder, and brutal suffering. First of all, his name isn't even Hercules. The Greeks called him Heracles, meaning glory of Hera. Ironically, Hera hated him. Why? Because Zeus, being Zeus, couldn't keep it in his toga. Heracles was born from one of Zeus's countless affairs, so Hera made his life a living hell. As an infant, she sent snakes to kill Heracles in his crib. He strangled them with his bare hands. But her revenge wasn't over. As an adult, Hera drove Heracles into madness, and in his frenzy, he slaughtered his own wife, Megara, and his own children. When he realized what he had done, he was struck with grief, and he sought redemption. To atone, Heracles was sentenced to 12 impossible labors. These weren't fun action sequences. They were grueling, near-impossible tasks. He fought the Nemean lion, a giant lion with impenetrable skin. He battled the Hydra, a monster that grew 2 heads for everyone cut off. He cleaned the gigantic Augean stables in a single day and captured the 3-headed Cerberus, the guard of the underworld, each labor more brutal than the last. But his suffering didn't end there. His new wife, Deianira, unknowingly poisoned him with a tunic drenched in Hydra's blood, believing it was a love charm. The pain was so excruciating, he built his own funeral pyre, jumped in, and had his friend Philoctetes set it ablaze. His mortal side is consumed by the flames, and the divine half ascends Olympus. Cinderella. Disney's Cinderella is one of the studio's most iconic fairy tales. Glass slippers, talking mice, a fairy godmother, and a happily ever after. But the Cinderella story is ancient. There are thousands of versions told across cultures, from ancient Greece to China, and from Vietnam to Egypt. Disney's Cinderella is based on the 1697 French version by Charles Perrault, and they stick pretty closely to the script. Again, good job, Disney. But Perrault's version is the softened one. The real fun comes from the brothers Grimm. There is no fairy godmother here. Cinderella's mother dies, and on her deathbed, she tells Cinderella to remain kind and pious. Cinderella plants a tree on her mother's grave and prays beneath it. White doves answers her wishes, dropping down dresses of silver and gold. Her father, still alive, but completely useless, watching as she's abused and reduced to a servant in her own home. When the king announces a 3-day ball, the stepsisters mock her. She's allowed to go only if she can sort lentils from ashes, not once, but twice. She succeeds with help from the birds. At the ball, she dazzles the prince. By the 3rd night, the prince is desperate to stop her from disappearing again, so he coats the palace stairs with tar. When Cinderella flees, her golden slipper gets stuck in the pitch. When the hopelessly face-blind prince comes to find the girl who fits the slipper, the stepmother has a plan. She makes one stepsister cut off her toes. The other slices off her heel. The prince is fooled twice, until the birds reveal the blood both times. When Cinderella finally tries the slipper, it fits. She's recognized as the mystery princess. But the stepsisters aren't done. At the wedding, they shamelessly try to worm their way into Cinderella's favor, now that she's going to be queen. The white birds returns and peck out one eye each, as a warning, a final chance to walk away. They don't take it, so the birds come back and peck out their remaining eyes. The Fox and the Hound. Disney's The Fox and the Hound is tragic enough as it is. A story about a curious fox named Todd and a sweet puppy named Copper, growing up as best friends, only to be torn apart by the world around them. But in the original 1967 novel by Daniel P. Mannix, there's no friendship. It's a story about obsession, revenge, and the long, slow death of the natural world. Todd is a red fox kit, raised by a hunter after his mother and siblings are killed. He eventually escapes to the wild, where he becomes clever and dangerously bold. He begins taunting a pack of chained hunting dogs, until one day, the youngest dog, Chief, breaks loose. Todd escapes by running along a railroad track, jumping clear at the last second. Chief isn't so lucky. He's hit and killed by the train. The master, Chief's owner, buries Chief and weeps. Then he turns to his remaining dog, Copper. From now on, Copper is trained to hunt only one fox, Todd. And so begins a decades-long vendetta. Each winter, the master and Copper set out. Each year, Todd survives, but with growing cost. His first litter of kits is gassed to death in their den. His mate is caught and killed in a trap. A second mate is lured out and shot using the cries of her dying young as bait. As the years pass, the countryside disappears. Farmland becomes suburbia. The forest shrinks. The foxes that remain grow sickly and desperate. But Todd stays, and the master keeps hunting him, because it's all he has left. When rabies spread in the fox population, the city asks the master to help exterminate the remaining foxes. He sets traps, lays poison, and joins mass hunts. But Todd escapes every time. That is until the final chase. Copper tracks Todd for over a day. No guns and no traps, just dog against fox. And finally, Todd collapses, dying of exhaustion. Copper returns home, a hero. But time passes, and the master is told to move to a nursing home. No dogs allowed. So he takes Copper outside, tells him to lie down, pets him a bit, and covers his eyes. And then he pulls the trigger. The end.
What does the fox say?
Frozen. Disney's Frozen is one of the studio's biggest hits. A queen with ice powers, a quirky sister, talking snowmen, and a lesson in self-love. But Frozen wasn't supposed to be that at all. Originally, it was meant to be a more direct adaptation of The Snow Queen, H.C. Andersen's 1844 fairy tale. And that story is much colder. As with every good story, it begins with the devil. He creates a mirror that distorts everything good and beautiful, magnifying only the ugly and cruel. The devil tries to show God his invention, but the mirror shatters on the way, scattering razor-sharp fragments across the world. Some pieces lodge in people's hearts and eyes, turning them bitter, angry, and blind to kindness. And the devil laughed at the misfortunes he has created. And two of those fragments strikes a boy named Kai. Kai, formerly a good little boy, becomes cold and cruel, and he hurts his best friend, Gerda. One winter day, he vanishes. He jumps into a sleigh driven by a silent, white-robed figure, the Snow Queen. She kisses him once to numb him from the cold, and once to erase his past. Kai forgets his family. He forgets Gerda, and he forgets himself. But Gerda doesn't forget him. She sets out alone, barefoot and heartbroken, with no magic and no powers. Only her love for Kai. She journeys through enchanted gardens, robber camps, and endless snow. She only receives occasional assistance from talking reindeer, and a Finn woman who declares that Gerda is armed with the greatest weapon of all, love. Gerda finally reaches the lands of the Snow Queen. She rules over the snow bees, swarms of stinging, sentient snowflakes. When Gerda reaches the palace, they attack. She prays, and her breath forms angels that drive them away. Inside, Kai sits alone on a frozen lake, the mirror of reason, trying to form the word eternity from shards of ice. If he succeeds, the Snow Queen will release him and give him a pair of skates. But he doesn't recognize Gerda. She runs to him and weeps. Her tears melts the ice in his heart. He begins to cry. The mirror splinter dislodges from his eye, and he remembers her. They dance, and the ice shards dances with them. When the shards grew tired, they fell perfectly into place, spelling eternity. Kai won his freedom. and a pair of skates. They return home and find it the same as it was when they left it. But they are not the same. They've grown up, and the snow has finally melted. Tangled. Disney's Tangled is a fun adventure about a lost princess with magical hair, raised by the evil Mother Gothel. She escapes, finds love, discovers her royal identity, and gets her happily ever after. But, as always, the Brothers Grimm version is different. It all starts with a pregnant woman who craves Rapunzel, rampion, an herb only growing in the garden of a powerful enchantress, Dame Gothel. She becomes obsessed, telling her husband that if she doesn't get it, she will die. So, the husband sneaks into the garden and steals some for his hysteric wife. The first time, he gets away with it. The second time, he's caught. Dame Gothel offers him a deal. Take all the Rapunzel you want, but in exchange, she gets their firstborn child. It seems like a fair deal, so he agrees and leaves with the herb. When the baby girl is born, Gothel immediately takes her away. When she turns 12, Gothel locks Rapunzel in a tower with no stairs, no doors, only a small window at the top. She visits her by climbing the girl's long golden hair. One day, a prince hears Rapunzel singing and watches Gothel climb the tower. He mimics her, and soon he and Rapunzel fall in love. They plan to escape together, but Rapunzel lets it slip to Gothel. Furious, Gothel cuts off her hair and banishes her to the desert, pregnant and alone. When the prince returns, Gothel lures him up with the severed hair, then reveals Rapunzel is gone forever. In despair, he jumps out of the tower, landing in thorns that pierce his eyes, blinding him. For years, he wanders the wilderness, until one day he hears Rapunzel's voice. He finds her, and she begins to cry. Her tears fell into his eyes and restored his sight, and he sees their twins, the children he never knew he had. He takes her back to his kingdom, and they live happily ever after. The Jungle Book. Disney's The Jungle Book is a musical adventure. A carefree boy named Mowgli sings with a bear, dances with monkeys, and learns the meaning of friendship in the jungle, before returning to his own kind. But Rudyard Kipling's original Jungle Book, published in 1894, is no bedtime story. In Kipling's version, the jungle is a brutal place. Mowgli is a human child raised by wolves, but he never truly belongs, neither to animals nor to men. The jungle isn't a musical. It runs on a strict code. Power, obedience, and violence rule everything. Even Baloo and Bagheera are nothing like Disney's version. They're strict mentors. Mowgli is beaten, scarred, and shaped into a creature the jungle fears, but never fully accepts. When Mowgli tries to live among humans, they reject him too. So he returns with elephants and razes the village to the ground. And Shere Khan, the tiger, isn't some smooth-talking villain. He's a bitter cripple that Mowgli chases away with fire, stolen from a local village. Mowgli finally defeats him by luring Shere Khan into a ravine, and Mowgli watches as a buffalo stampede tramples the tiger to death. There are echoes of British imperialism in the background of the story. Kipling saw order, law, and hierarchy as necessary, especially in colonized lands. Mowgli, the outsider who brings discipline to the jungle, reflects that view. But even the jungle can't hold him forever. As Mowgli grows into a man, he outgrows the wild. In the end, he says goodbye to the animals who raised him and walks alone into human society. But the look on Mowgli's face was not one of joy. Peter Pan. Disney's Peter Pan is a cheerful fantasy. A boy who never grows up, a fairy with attitude, some jolly pirates, and flying children. But J.M. Barrie's original tale is far more complicated and far more disturbing. It begins in London, where Peter Pan visits the darling children and whisks them off to Neverland, a dreamlike place filled with mermaids, fairies, and danger. Wendy becomes the lost boy's mother, Peter their father. They play house. They fight pirates. But something's not right. Neverland isn't a paradise. It's something else. The Lost Boys forget their own names. They forget their families. They even forget who Peter is if he's gone too long. And when they begin to grow up, or if they become too many, Peter thins them out. The book never explains how, but the implication is chilling. And it doesn't stop there. Peter hunts the pirates for sport. And sometimes, in the middle of a battle with the natives, if the Lost Boys have the upper hand, he switches sides and presumably attacks the Lost Boys for fun. He isn't a brave leader. He's emotionally detached, forgetful, and disturbingly childlike in the worst ways. And when Tinkerbell dies of old age, Peter simply moves on. He doesn't even remember her name. At the end, Wendy and her brothers returns home. Peter promises to visit, but as with everything else, he forgets. When he finally remembers, he visits her years later and finds her grown, with a daughter of her own, then a granddaughter, each time thinking they're the same girl at the window. Peter stays young, but everyone else moves on, and he doesn't notice. And thus it will go on, so long as children are gay and innocent and heartless. Anastasia. In Disney's Anastasia, we get a lovely story about a missing... Okay, it's technically Fox, but it's owned by Disney now. Sue me. Anyway, we get a romantic fantasy, a lost Russian princess, a charming con man, an undead sorcerer, and a quest to reclaim her identity. It ends with love, laughter, and the rightful heir to the Russian Empire living happily ever after. The real story? Not quite. The film is based on the long-standing rumor that Anastasia Romanov, the youngest daughter of Tsar Nicholas II, somehow escaped the execution of her family during the Russian Revolution. For decades, people hoped. Several imposters came forward claiming to be her. But Anastasia didn't escape. None of the Romanovs did. In 1918, the Tsar and his family, Nicholas, Alexandra, and their 5 children, were led into a basement by Bolshevik guards. They were told it was for their safety. Then the shooting began. And it did not go smoothly. The daughters, including Anastasia, had sewn diamonds and jewels into their corsets. The bullets ricocheted off like armor. So the guards switched to bayonets. There was no dramatic escape. In the movie, it's Rasputin's curse that sparks the Russian Revolution and dooms the Romanovs. In real life, the Tsar brought it on himself. Nicholas II ruled with divine arrogance. His failures in war, refusal to reform, and contempt for his people's plight fueled the revolution. The Russian people hated the Romanovs because of misrule, not magic. And Rasputin? In the movie, he's an undead lich with glowing green powers. In reality, he was Russia's greatest love machine. A man brought in to heal the crown prince hemophilia. The nobles hated him, so they tried to off him. Turns out he was absurdly hard to kill. Poisoned, shot, beaten, shot again, and finally tossed into a freezing river. And even after all that, the course of death was drowning. So no, he didn't have a phylactery, but it was close. Anastasia gave us a fairy tale of survival, magic, and a missing princess. History gave us the Soviet Union. Pocahontas. Disney's Pocahontas tells the story of a brave, free-spirited Native American woman who bridges 2 worlds through love, wisdom, and song. But the Disney version is loosely based on the life of the real-life Pocahontas, except for the fact that the real Pocahontas lived a short, tragic life, marked by abduction and exploitation. She was born around 1596, named Amanute, and nicknamed Pocahontas, meaning playful one. She was the daughter of Wahunsenaka, also known as Chief Powhatan, leader of the Powhatan Confederacy in what's now Virginia. When the English arrived in 1607, Pocahontas was just about 10 or 11 years old, so there was no romance with the famous settler, John Smith. However, he did claim that she saved his life, but historians disagree on whether it happened or not. What is known is that Pocahontas did visit the English on several occasions, and brought them food during times of famine, acting as a symbolic bridge between cultures. That bridge was burned in 1613, when Pocahontas was kidnapped by the English during the First Anglo-Powhatan War. Held for ransom, she was encouraged to convert to Christianity and was baptized as Rebecca and married to a widowed tobacco planter named John Rolfe. She was around 17. The marriage was seemingly voluntary from both parties and was framed as a diplomatic victory, the Peace of Pocahontas. However, Powhatan tradition insists that Pocahontas had been forcefully separated from her Powhatan husband, Kocoum, who may have been killed during her abduction. In 1616, the Virginia Company brought her to England as propaganda, a civilized savage to promote investment in the colony. She was paraded through English society and painted in European clothing. She even met the king. But she never saw her home again. In 1617, while preparing to return to Virginia, Pocahontas fell suddenly ill. She died at age 21. Officially, the cause was unknown, possibly pneumonia or dysentery. She was buried in Gravesend, far from her people, her land, and even her own name. Mulan. Disney's Mulan is a story of bravery, honor, and self-discovery. A young woman defies tradition, takes her father's place in battle, and saves China. She returns home a hero, embraced by her family, and celebrated for her courage. The original legend of Mulan is over 1,000 years old, first appearing in the Ballad of Mulan, a folk poem from the Northern Wei era. In it, Mulan disguises herself as a man, taking her father's place in the army, and fights for 12 years. Her comrades are stunned to learn she was a woman all along. She declines power, rejects reward, and simply asks to go home. So all is good, right? Well, not exactly. The 17th century retelling, The Romance of Sui and Tang, offers no such happy ending. Here, Mulan is again a devoted daughter, taking her father's place in the army. But this version unfolds against a backdrop of political chaos and shifting alliances. Captured by enemy forces, Mulan meets Xianyang, a warrior princess who uncovers Mulan's secret and becomes her sworn sister. When the war ends, the emperor offers Mulan riches and a new life. But again, she just wants to go home. But here, everything has changed. Her father is dead, her mother has remarried, and her home is gone. And then comes the final blow. The Khan who rules her land summons her to become his concubine. Faced with this unbearable future, Mulan sees only one way out. She chooses to end her suffering right then and there. Beauty and the Beast. Across the world, there are countless Beauty and the Beast tales, from Italian and Chinese snake beasts to the Spanish wolfman. But the most famous literary version comes from Gabrielle-Suzanne de Villeneuve in 1740. In her version, Beauty is the youngest of 12, with 5 jealous sisters who despise her. When her father stumbles into the Beast's castle and steals a single rose, naturally, the Beast demands one of his daughters in payment. Beauty volunteers to go, certain she's marching to her doom. In the Disney version, the castle is full of servants transformed into job-specific appliances. But in the original, monkey butlers. And obviously having the monkeys talk would be too ridiculous. So they communicate through interpreter parrots. Yeah, I don't know either. Let's just continue, shall we? In this version, the Beast isn't just ugly. He's also cursed to be dim-witted, barely able to hold a conversation. Every night he asks Beauty to let him sleep with her, and every night she refuses. She then proceeds to dream of a handsome prince, and a fairy who tells her to look past appearances. Gee, I wonder what that means. Beauty is in love with the dream prince, and clearly not the Beast. Still, she promises to return to him after visiting her family. But she doesn't come back at the agreed time, and when she finally arrives, the Beast is dying of grief. Overcome with guilt, she agrees to marry him, and finally lets him into her bed, and only then does he transform into the prince from her dreams. And they lived happily ever after. Psych. First, the prince launches into an absurdly long backstory that nobody asked for. There is, however, one interesting detail. The Beast tells us about how he got turned into a monster and it was because he once rejected an ugly fairy's love, and she cursed him in return. Kind of ironic, huh? The Three Little Pigs. Disney's 1933 animated short film, The Three Little Pigs, is a cheery, silly symphony about three pig brothers, a goofy wolf, and a happy little song. Who's Afraid of the Big Bad Wolf? That became a Depression-era anthem for optimism. The pigs dance, play music, and outwit the wolf with slapstick charm. The worst thing that happens is when the wolf dresses up as a racial stereotype, or when he gets a sore backside from falling into a pot of boiling water before running away, tail between his legs. But in Joseph Jacobs' 1890 version, the wolf doesn't just scare the first two pigs. He huffs and he puffs until the first house of straw collapses, and he eats the first pig. Then he huffs and he puffs at the second house made out of sticks until it collapses, and he devours the second pig as well. The third pig built a brick house, and no matter how much the wolf huffs and puffs, he can't blow it down. So the crafty wolf tries to meet the pig at a turnip field, an apple orchard, and a fair. But the pig outsmarts him every time by getting there early. Finally, the wolf climbs down the chimney, straight into a boiling pot. But unlike Disney's wolf, who limps away, this one is boiled alive. And the third pig eats him for dinner, celebrating, knowing he avenged his brothers. Little Red Riding Hood. Turns out, Disney already had an extended universe in the 30s. Disney's short movie, Little Red Riding Hood, is basically a crossover with the Three Little Pigs. Practical Pig warns her not to take the shortcut, but she ignores him, and the other two pigs drags her along, and they get stalked by the big bad wolf in a very bad fairy queen disguise. The wolf assault Little Red Riding Hood and her grandmother, and the pigs save them by putting popcorn seeds and hot coals down the wolf's pants. He runs off and they all sing, "Who's Afraid of the Big Bad Wolf?" But Charles Perrault's 1697 version, not so sing-along friendly. Little Red Riding Hood meets the wolf in the woods, and she tells him where she's going. The wolf tricks her into picking flowers while he goes to her grandmother's house. He swallows Grandma whole, dresses up in her clothes, and waits in her bed. When Little Red Riding Hood finally arrives, she comments on the big ears, big eyes, and big teeth. And then the wolf leaps out and eats her whole. And the wolf lies down for a nice nap. And that's it. The end. But the brothers Grimm weren't done. In their 19th century telling, a passing hunter slices the wolf open, and Little Red Riding Hood and Grandma crawls out, somehow still alive, and they all fill the wolf's belly with heavy stones. Then they sew him back up. The wolf wakes up, gets thirsty, staggers to a well, falls in, and drowns. And that is the end. The Little Match Girl. When I first started researching this list, I assumed this H.C. Andersen classic was way too dark for Disney. Surely they'd never touch it. Turns out, I was wrong. Disney made a true adaptation of Andersen's saddest story as part of their canceled Fantasia 2006 project. The only real change? The setting was moved from Denmark to pre-revolution Russia. The story is short, simple, and utterly heartbreaking. On a freezing New Year's Eve, a poor young girl wanders the snowy streets, trying to sell matches, but no one buys them. Barefoot, starving, and afraid to go home to her abusive father, she huddles in an alley for warmth. She freezes so terribly, so she strikes a match. The fire burned so wonderfully, warming her fingers, and in the tiny flame, she sees the most magical glowing stove. But the fire soon burns out, and she is back in the cold. She lights another match, and she sees a feast of roast goose running towards her. How wonderful! But yet again, the flame goes out. She flicks another, and she sees a towering Christmas tree lit with thousands of candles. How beautiful! But the flame goes out again. Freezing again, she strikes one more, and this time, her deceased grandmother appears in the flame. The only person who ever loved her. Desperate to keep her, the girl lights the whole bundle of matches. She begs her grandmother to take her away, and together they rise up to God. By morning, passers-by finds her little frozen body with a faint smile on her face. They pity her, never knowing she left this world in her grandmother's arms. The end. The Princess and the Frog. Disney's The Princess and the Frog is a jazzy 1920s New Orleans fairy tale where a hard-working waitress kisses a cursed prince, turns into a frog herself, and the two hop through bayous and musical numbers until love breaks the spell. It's charming, upbeat, and the worst thing that happens in this fun story is when the evil voodoo villain gets his soul dragged to hell by shadow demons. Okay, that's actually pretty dark. Anyway, the original tale, The Frog Prince by the Brothers Grimm, begins when a spoiled princess drops her golden ball down a well. A frog offers to fetch it, but only if she promises to be his friend. She agrees and then bolts the second she gets her ball back. The next day, the frog knocks at the castle door. Her father, the king, scolds her for breaking her promise and insists she honor her word. So she has to eat dinner with the frog while he slurps from her plate. Then he demands to sleep in her bed. She refuses, but the king scolds her again, and she reluctantly lets the frog hop onto her bed. Now, the frog jumps around on the bed, demanding they both sleep in it. And in the popular English translation, the princess kisses the frog and poof, he's a prince. But in the actual Grimm's version, she gets so disgusted with his frogness that she hurls him against the wall, and then he falls to the ground and turns into a prince. So the king is vindicated and the young couple marry. The end. So, if it stands between the frog wall smash romance and having your soul consumed by voodoo spirits, I think Disney might actually be the darker one here. Fine, you win this round, Disney.
That's a frog, isn't it?
Aladdin. Disney's Aladdin is a from rags to riches romance with catchy songs, a sassy blue genie, and a happy ending that leaves the bad guy stuck in a lamp. But the original, it's not even set in Arabia. It's in China. The story of Aladdin is part of the 1001 Stories in the Arabian Nights, a collection of Arabian folklore. Aladdin is a lazy kid living in one of the cities of China, which, for some reason, has a sultan and exclusively Muslim citizens. Then, a mysterious sorcerer from North Africa shows up claiming to be Aladdin's long-lost uncle. He isn't. He just needs Aladdin to crawl into a booby-trapped cave and fetch a magical oil lamp. Aladdin gets the lamp, but the sorcerer double-crosses him, leaving him trapped. That is until Aladdin accidentally rubs a magic ring while praying, and a genie pops out to save him, teleporting him home. Turns out the lamp has an even more powerful genie, one who grants Aladdin riches, a palace, and the Sultan's daughter. Things go great until the sorcerer comes back, and he tricks the princess into giving him the magical lamp by offering a seemingly better model. The princess falls for it, and the sorcerer teleports the entire palace to Africa. Aladdin uses the lesser genie to follow them, kills the sorcerer, and gets everything back. Then, the sorcerer's evil brother shows up disguised as a healing old woman. The princess lets him move in with them, but the genie warns Aladdin, and then he kills the sorcerer. And that's it. Aladdin then succeeds the Sultan and reigns for many years, leaving behind him a long line of kings. The end. Babes in the Woods. Disney's Babes in the Woods from 1932 is yet another silly symphony. It is basically a fairy tale mashup, part Hansel and Gretel and part English legend. In this version, Hansel and Gretel find a dwarf/gnome village, gets kidnapped by a candy house witch who turns children into animals. Luckily, the dwarfs stage a rescue. The kids whip up an antidote, and the witch falls into her own cauldron, turning her to stone, and everyone cheers. But the original English legend, Babes in the Woods, published in 1595, is much less dwarfs and happy endings, and much more bleak child tragedy. It tells of two orphaned children left in their uncle's care. The uncle, eager for their inheritance, hires ruffians to kill them. However, one relents, so he kills his partner instead and abandons the children in the woods with a promise to return. But he never does. The children then wander the forest until they succumb to hunger and thirst, collapses, and dies. Then, their little bodies are gently covered with leaves by robins. And, yeah, that's it. I mean, sure, the wicked uncle meets a miserable fate. He loses his wealth and his sons, but that's little comfort to the kids, who are still quite dead. In newer, sanitized versions, the kids are taken straight to heaven. In the original one, their little bodies just stays very, very quiet. Alice in Wonderland. Disney's Alice in Wonderland is a whimsical fever dream of talking animals, mad tea parties, and a girl who learns that logic has no place in Wonderland. And the original Lewis Carroll novel? Surprisingly similar. Almost identical, in fact. Good job, Disney. So this time, the darkness doesn't come from the source material itself. It comes from its author. Lewis Carroll was a mathematics lecturer with a passion for photography, wordplay, and the company of little girls. His inspiration for Alice was Alice Liddell, the young daughter of a family he befriended. Carroll took her and her sisters on rowing trips, told them stories, and photographed them in creepy costumes. Oh, and over half of Carroll's entire portfolio depicted young girls, some only wearing their birthday suits. In Victorian England, this was brushed off as artistic appreciation. Today, it's almost impossible not to see it as predatory. Rumors persist that Carroll wanted to marry Alice when she was just 11, which is speculated to be the reason that his once close relationship with her family abruptly ended. No evidence ever proved Carroll guilty of anything, but once you know about his fascination with the real Alice, the whimsical nonsense of Wonderland starts to feel a lot less innocent.
Well, looks like the good Lord just sent me a conversation starter.
Bambi. Bambi is the original Disney heartbreaker. The death of Bambi's mother is right up there on our shared childhood trauma list. Disney adapted Felix Salten's 1923 novel, Bambi, A Life in the Woods, and Salten's forest isn't a place for songs and ice skating tutorials. It's a survival horror story for deer. In the movie, Bambi's mother is endlessly gentle. In the book, she loves him, but the forest forces her to be harder. As soon as mating season arrives, she begins pushing him away. Fawns must learn to be alone or die. Bambi cries for her, and his father, the great prince, appears, but only to scold him for needing his mother so much before he walks away into the trees. Humans kill Bambi's mother in both versions, but the book's portrayal of them is far more terrifying. Humans are portrayed like omnipotent forest gods, referred to only as he or him. When a deer sees a human's pale face, he instinctively freezes in terror. Hunting dogs are treated as literal traitors. In one scene, the forest animals accuse a dog of betraying his own kind, and the dog angrily shouts that he is an all-powerful being, who only spares those who serve him. Then the dog tears out a fox's throat. Disney wisely skipped that part. Then there's Gobo, a young deer who was taken in and raised by a hunter after being wounded. He grows up tame, convinced that humans are kind. When he later sees his former caretaker, he approaches happily to say hello, and is shot dead on sight. After Bambi's mother dies, the great prince steps in. He teaches Bambi that survival means solitude. Hide constantly, trust no one, depend on no one. Eventually, he even shows Bambi a dead hunter, proving that he is not a god. After passing on his final lesson, the great prince walks into the forest to die alone, but not before telling Bambi for the first and only time that he loves him dearly. Do you get it? It's because they're deers. No? Ugh, tough crowd. Anyways, Bambi becomes the new prince of the forest. He scolds his own fawns for needing their mother too much and walks away into the trees. Ah, the circle of life. Moana. Disney's Moana is a vibrant, feel-good ocean adventure. A brave girl chosen by the sea, a hilarious rooster, and a swaggering demigod who sings about how awesome he is. Moana restores the heart of Te Fiti, heals the world, revives her people's voyaging traditions, and sails into her destiny. But the real Polynesian myths behind the film, they're a lot older, a lot darker, and, well, much stranger. Moana herself is fictional, but the world she comes from isn't. The film draws heavily from the real Polynesian voyagers, some of the greatest navigators in human history, who suddenly stopped exploring the Pacific for nearly 1,000 years before resuming again. Historians aren't really sure why. Anyways, the heart of the movie is Maui. In the film, he's a lovable, tattooed himbo with a magic hook. In the myths, he's a trickster, a thief, a hero, and a disaster, and his origins are far more grotesque. He steals fire from the underworld by tricking the fire goddess Mahuika to keep giving him her flaming fingernails, and nearly gets burned alive for it. In another story, the days are too short for his liking, so he slows the sun by ambushing it in its sleep and beating it with a jawbone. Go, Maui, go! Oh, and he is also responsible for fishing whole islands out of the sea, using blood from his own nose as bait. But his final heroic plan is the darkest, and frankly, the funniest. Maui decided that mankind needed immortality, and to achieve it, he needed to defeat the goddess of death. To do so, he had an ingenious plan. He transforms into a worm and tries to crawl inside the sleeping goddess's body. And he, of course, decides to enter through her lady bits, planning to leave through her mouth, reversing the natural birth process. If he succeeds, mankind lives forever. Unfortunately, a bunch of birds watch this happening, and they find it hilarious and burst into laughter. This wakes the goddess, who promptly crushes Maui to death with the obsidian teeth inside her hoo-ha. And that, in Polynesian mythology, is literally why humans die. Disney gave us a charming, uplifting tale about finding your way. Mythology gave us a demigod who got himself killed inside a giant divine vagina. The Sword in the Stone. Disney's The Sword in the Stone is one of the original classics. A clumsy kid named Wart is tutored by the quirky old wizard, Merlin. Talking animals, and a magical destiny waiting at the end of it all. Wart pulls the sword from the stone, boom, he's King Arthur. Just lovely. The movie is based on T.H. White's 1938 novel, which itself draws from the medieval Arthurian legends. And those are a lot darker than Higitus Figitus. The original Merlin is not just the greatest wizard in British mythology. In medieval texts, he's often half demonic, literally the son of a nun, and in some texts, Satan himself. Merlin was created to be the Antichrist, meant to undo Jesus' good work. But the plan backfired when his mother had him baptized, cleansing the evil, but leaving the supernatural powers intact. Merlin becomes a shapeshifter, prophet, manipulator, and kingmaker, who engineers Arthur's entire existence. Arthur's own conception is, ethically questionable. Uther Pendragon, the King of England, lusts after Igraine, the wife of his rival, Duke Gorlois. So Merlin helps Uther magically disguise himself as the Duke, so Uther can sleep with Igraine, and that union produces Arthur. I wonder why Disney left that part out. Anyways, Arthur then grows up, pulls the sword in the stone, becomes king, and then accidentally sleeps with his half-sister Morgause, producing Mordred, the son destined to kill him. So far, extremely wholesome. The sword in the stone proves Arthur's right to rule, but it later breaks when he fights a giant. So he was given the magical sword, Excalibur, by some watery tart. The Round Table rises as an ideal of justice, unity, and virtue. A place where you can go on cool quests like the hunt for the Holy Grail. And then, it all collapses thanks to Lancelot and Guinevere's affair, splintering Camelot into civil war. Even the master wizard is undone by love. Merlin falls for the lady in the lake, you know, the watery tart from before. He teaches her all his magic. and she reciprocates by trapping him with his own spells, sealing him away forever in an oak tree. And crucially, Merlin disappears before Arthur faces Mordred. In their final battle, Arthur kills Mordred, but not before being mortally wounded himself. Arthur is taken to the mythical island of Avalon, where he lies in a deep sleep, awaiting the time of Britain's greatest need, when he will awaken to save the country. Disney gave us a charming, quirky fairy tale about a boy finding his destiny. The original myth gave us a demonic wizard, an incestuous king, and a noble kingdom that collapses due to two devastating love affairs. The Steadfast Tin Soldier. Disney's version of the Steadfast Tin Soldier is a part of the Fantasia 2000 segment. It's a sweet musical fairy tale. A brave one-legged tin soldier falls in love with a beautiful ballerina, fights the evil Jack-in-the-Box, survives sewers, rats, and even a trout. And in the end, he defeats the villain and earns his happily ever after. But in H.C. Andersen's original, there is no happy ending. In Andersen's story, the tin soldier falls in love with a paper ballerina because he thinks she, like him, only has one leg. But he never speaks to her and never moves toward her, for she lives in a castle, and he lives in a box with his 24 identical brothers. At night, when all the toys come to life, the soldier still stands perfectly still, steadfast, and hopelessly in love. And then the trouble begins. The jealous goblin, who lives inside a tobacco tin, demands that the soldier look away from the ballerina. When he refuses, the goblin swears revenge. The next morning, a sudden gust of wind, summoned by the goblin, knocks the soldier out of the window. He lies helpless in the street. His owner, the little boy, searches for him, but he doesn't find him, since the soldier finds it improper to shout while in uniform. Eventually, two boys find him, place him in a paper boat, and send him sailing down a filthy gutter. There, he's chased by a giant rat demanding to see his passport. His paper boat dissolves, he sinks, and a fish swallows him whole. By chance, the fish is caught, sold, and brought back to the very house he came from. The maid cuts open the fish and finds the soldier, who is placed once again on the table facing the ballerina. The pair simply look at one another. He could have cried with joy, but, he was still in uniform. And then, without warning, the little boy throws the tin soldier into the stove, driven by the goblin's influence. Inside the fire, the tin soldier begins to melt. The heat is unbearable. He doesn't know whether he's burning from the flames or from his love for the dancer. And in the final tragic moment, a gust of wind blows the ballerina into the flames beside him, and they burn together. The next morning, the maid rakes out the ashes. All that remains of the soldier is a tiny tin heart, and all that's left of the ballerina is a single blackened sequin. Winnie the Pooh. Disney's Winnie the Pooh is one of its most successful franchises of all time, and it is as gentle as children's media gets. A honey-addicted bear, a peaceful forest, and a boy named Christopher Robin who spends his days having wholesome adventures with stuffed animals. But behind all that sunshine is a tragic real-life story, because Christopher Robin was a real boy, and he eventually grew up to hate Winnie the Pooh. Christopher Robin Milne adored his toys at first. Pooh, Piglet, Tigger, Eeyore. All of them were real stuffed animals he dragged around the 500-acre wood near his family's country home. His father, A.A. Milne, watched him play, took notes, and started writing poems and stories based directly on his son's life and imagination. And it became a gigantic success. Christopher Robin was suddenly one of the most famous children in the world at age 6. And kids, being kids, were merciless. He was bullied relentlessly in school for being the Christopher Robin from the books. As he got older, things got worse. He felt his father had climbed on his infant shoulders to build a career on his childhood. He resented being famous for something he never chose. He spent most of his adulthood distancing himself from the books, and for years refused to speak to his parents. By adulthood, Christopher Robin openly admitted he had grown to hate Winnie the Pooh. Meanwhile, Pooh only got bigger. Disney turned him into a billion-dollar empire that Christopher wanted nothing to do with. The Ugly Duckling. Disney's silly symphony version of The Ugly Duckling is cute and mostly harmless. H.C. Andersen's original 1843 tale is not that. The premise of the story is the same. A mother duck hatches her eggs and one chick looks wrong. But in the original, the bullying isn't just a quick montage. It's relentless and comes from all sides. A bunch of ducklings hatch in a barnyard, but one of them is big and disgustingly ugly. Every creature in the barnyard attacks him. Ducks bite him, including his own mother. The hens peck him. Even the girl who feeds them kicks him for being so ugly. Within days, he's so tormented he runs away into the wild. He is allowed to live among wild ducks and geese, if he promises not to marry any of them. Then, hunters massacre the entire flock. A hunting dog finds him, sniffs him, decides he's too ugly to bother eating, and walks away. He escapes to an old woman's cottage, only to be mocked by her cat and hen for not laying eggs or meowing, and for wanting silly things like swimming. So he flees again. Winter nearly kills him. He hides in frozen reeds, starves, freezes, and gets trapped in ice. Only in spring does the end arrive. He is no longer a duckling, but he is still miserable and ready to die. So he approaches a group of swans, expecting them to peck him to death because of his ugliness. It's better to be killed by something beautiful, you see. But instead of murdering him, they welcome him. He sees his reflection. He was a swan all along. And the children in the garden call him the most beautiful of all and feeds the swans corn and bread. The no longer ugly duckling lifts his head, stunned, and accepts it. The Black Cauldron. The Black Cauldron is one of Disney's strangest films, and one of its biggest flops. There is no musical numbers here, just a skeletal undead king trying to raise an undead army in a world based on ancient Welsh mythology. I loved it as a kid, but its dark tone and poor reception nearly killed Disney's animation department. The movie is based on Lloyd Alexander's Chronicles of Prydain, which themselves draw heavily from the Mabinogion, the oldest surviving Welsh legends. Central to those legends is the Per Dadaini, the Cauldron of Rebirth, a magical vessel that can bring dead warriors back to life. Except they don't come back normal. They come back mute, soulless, and almost impossible to kill. Basically, medieval zombies. In the original tale, the cauldron is gifted to the Irish king Mythology after his horses are mutilated by the Welsh king Branwen's unhinged brother, Efnisien. The gift is not enough, so the Irish and Welsh fight a brutal war. The Irish uses the cauldron to resurrect endless waves of soldiers. Realizing the Welsh can't win against a literal undead army, Efnisien hides among the corpses, lets himself be thrown into the cauldron, and destroys it from the inside, sacrificing himself to stop the carnage he had caused. So while Disney's The Black Cauldron is remembered as the studio's awkward goth phase, the source material it comes from is way older and, well, better. The Adventures of Ichabod and Mr. Toad. The Adventures of Ichabod and Mr. Toad is one of Disney's strangest combos ever. Half of it is a chaotic British adventure about a rich amphibian with motor mania, and the other half is one of the scariest things Disney ever animated. Let's skip Mr. Toad. His source material isn't really dark, except for the fact that in the original book he wasn't framed. He really did steal the car. Anyways, the reason we're here is Ichabod and the Headless Horseman. Disney absolutely nails the mood. The eerie woods, the cackling horseman, the flaming pumpkin, and the iconic chase scene. And surprisingly, Disney stays very faithful to Washington Irving's 1820 story, with a few key twists. The basic setup is the same. Ichabod is a lanky, scarecrow-looking, superstitious social climber. Disney gives him a little charm, but Irving makes it clear that Ichabod only wants Katrina for her father's land and money, and he competes with Brom Bones, the local prankster, for her affection. In Irving's story, the party ends with Katrina rejecting Ichabod outright after using him to make Brom jealous. Crucially, Brom doesn't know this. That night, Ichabod rides home humiliated and meets the Headless Horseman. In the short story, the horseman is said to be a Hessian soldier whose head was carried away by a cannonball during the Revolutionary War. But Irving drops clue after clue that the ghost isn't real at all. It's Brom in disguise. And Irving leaves breadcrumbs everywhere. The smoking gun is that the head thrown at Ichabod turns out to be just a pumpkin, laying smashed on the ground the next morning. Brom conveniently told the story about the horseman earlier at the party, and Brom laughs a little too hard whenever Ichabod's disappearance is mentioned. Disney leans a bit more supernatural. The horseman's horse has glowing eyes, and when Ichabod looks down the horseman's collar, he reacts like he sees nothing inside. Yet, the supernatural element might just all be in Ichabod's imagination. And there are some signs in Disney's version as well, that it might be Brom all along. In any case, Ichabod disappears that night in both versions. Whether he was murdered by Brom, scared out of town, or truly taken by a ghost, is entirely up to you. The Lion King. You could argue that Disney's The Lion King is an original story. That is, if we pretend that the Japanese anime Kimpa the White Lion doesn't exist, and Disney obviously did that. So, we're just doing the same. But even if we ignore Kempa, there is an older resemblance. The Lion King is essentially Hamlet. Yes, The Lion King is Shakespeare. Kind of. It's not a carbon copy. For starters, to my disappointment, Hamlet is not a lion. He's the Prince of Denmark. But there are countless similarities to the stories. A wise and beloved king is murdered by his jealous brother. That's Mufasa and King Hamlet. The villainous uncle who seizes the throne is Scar and Claudius. And the prince, the young and rightful heir, is driven into exile. That's Simba/Prince Hamlet. Both princes are even visited by their fathers in ghost form. The apparition of King Hamlet demands revenge. Mufasa just wants Simba to go home, stop eating bugs, and remember who he is. Then there is the side characters. Rafiki is basically a mix of the deceased court jester Yorick and Hamlet's loyal friend Horatio, fused into a being that forces the hero to face the brutal truth. And if Rafiki is Horatio, then Timon and Pumbaa are the Rosencrantz and Guildenstern of The Lion King, comedic relief characters sent to cheer up the hero. Except Timon and Pumbaa doesn't betray Simba before Simba orders their execution. Anyways, back to the main story. Both tales has the same core idea. A boy must return home and reclaim what was stolen. Simba's hesitation perfectly mirrors Hamlet, stuck between guilt, duty, and fear. But Hamlet spends the entire play agonizing about it. His inaction ends up getting everyone killed. His mother, his girlfriend, his friends, his uncle, and eventually himself. And Disney almost went that dark too. In an early alternate ending, Scar whispers the Shakespearean line, "Good night, sweet prince," before he seemingly kills Simba by throwing him off a cliff. And then Scar is consumed by fire, laughing like a maniac. Disney probably decided that one traumatizing cliff fall was enough for one movie, and then decided to end the film with yet another Elton John banger instead.
Long live the king.
The Pied Piper. Disney's version of The Pied Piper is yet another silly symphony. In the city of Hamelin, a plague of rats is devouring everything in sight, until a magical musician arrives. He plays his pipe and enchants the vermin away with a massive, magical block of cheese. But then, the greedy mayor refuses to pay what he owes. In the Disney film, the piper plays a different tune and leads the city's children away. He takes them to a joyland inside the mountains. A magical paradise where they live happily ever after, safe from their parents' corruption. The movie ends on a happy note, but, as always, the original German fairy tale is, well, darker. As is common with folklore, there are many versions. There are versions where, like Disney's, the kids are taken to magical places like Transylvania. In some, the piper is just a tough negotiator who returns the children once the town coughs up triple the original gold. But in the darkest versions, the children do not return. In those tales, the piper doesn't bother with magical cheese to get rid of the rats. He leads the rats straight into the river Weser to drown. So, can you guess where he leads the children when the city refuses to pay? That's right. He dons a green hunting outfit, plays a tune, and leads 130 children into the same river to drown. And then, the piper just goes his way. Let this be a lesson. Always pay your piper what you owe him. 101 Dalmatians. Disney's 101 Dalmatians is another classic, and honestly, it's already pretty dark. A stylish maniac wants to skin Dalmatian puppies to make a coat. That's a grim starting point for a kid's film. The movie is based on Dodie Smith's 1956 novel, and believe it or not, Disney actually toned down Cruella de Vil. Book Cruella is basically a demon in a fur coat. Her mansion is kept at hellfire temperatures, with roaring fireplaces in every room, because somehow she is always freezing. She eats everything buried in pepper, and when a puppy bites her, he says that she literally tastes hot. Her decor is massive monochrome rooms in violent reds and greens. Oh, and she regularly drowns her cat's kittens, 44 of them in total. She only keeps the mother for her fur value. The cat later betrays her for it. Her ancestral estate, Hell Hall, once belonged to a man villagers believed was either a serial killer or a literal demon with a tail who shot blue lightning from his body. Even her puppy killing plan is worse. At one point, she suggests locking the pups in a room so they'll eat each other, leaving the fur, and only abandons the idea because it would take too long. When the dogs finally escape, they are nearly captured by a band of Roma. Then, the puppies destroy Cruella's stock of unpaid furs, bankrupting her and forcing her out of the country. And then, there's the weird sequel, where an alien dog named Sirius freezes all humans in a magical sleep and invites all the dogs in the world to evacuate Earth before a nuclear apocalypse wipes out humanity. Sadly, Disney didn't include this in their sequel. Oliver and Company. Disney's Oliver and Company is one of the forgotten Disney classics from the 80s, starring a cute kitten named Oliver trying to survive New York City. He fights gangsters and makes friends with a pack of dogs. And of course, it all ends happily, with a birthday party. It may be that the movie is mainly forgotten, but it's based on one of the most famous literary works in the English language. Charles Dickens wrote Oliver Twist in 1837 as a brutal exposé of the horrors faced by England's poorest children during the Industrial Revolution. Oliver isn't a cute kitten. He's just another English child living in a workhouse, a government-run poverty prison, where starving children are fed so little that they draw lots to decide who must beg for more. Oliver loses, steps forward, and politely asks for a second bowl of gruel. The caretaker reacts with horror, as if he had committed a crime. He's thrown into solitary confinement and publicly beaten for the example. Then, he's sold off as an apprentice to an undertaker. Eventually, Oliver runs away to London, hoping for something better, and immediately falls into the hands of Fagin, a manipulative criminal who runs a gang of homeless child pickpockets. Fagin keeps the boys obedient through starvation, threats, and fake affection. When Oliver briefly escapes after being taken in by the kindly Mr. Brownlow, Fagin has him kidnapped and dragged back by the violent robber Bill Sikes and Sikes' lover, Nancy. Nancy, racked with guilt, secretly helps Oliver by passing information to Mr. Brownlow. Sikes responds by beating Nancy to the point of murdering her. And as if that weren't enough, a shadowy figure named Monks schemes behind the scenes to destroy Oliver's future, bribing officials, hiding proof of Oliver's parentage, and trying to ensure he lives and dies in misery. In the end, justice does come. Fagin is imprisoned. Sikes dies, hanged by his own rope, after falling from a rooftop, driven mad by visions of Nancy. Monks is revealed as Oliver's half-brother and meets a grim end of his own. Oliver is finally rescued, adopted by Mr. Brownlow, and loved. He gets a happy ending, but the road to get there is one of the darkest journeys a child protagonist has ever had to endure.
Please, sir, I want some more.
Atlantis, The Lost Empire. Atlantis is one of Disney's more alternative works. It's a Jules Verne-esque steampunk adventure where the nerdy linguist, Milo Thatch, teams up with a colorful crew of mercenaries to find a lost civilization. Giant leviathans, strange technology, and an 8,000-year-old warrior princess are discovered. By the end, Atlantis is saved, the villain is defeated, and all is good. But in the original myth, the Atlanteans didn't fare so well. The story of Atlantis comes entirely from the ancient Greek philosopher Plato, written around 360 BCE in his dialogues Timaeus and Critias. While ancient scholars debated its reality, today most agree that Atlantis is a fabrication Plato pulled out of his imagination to teach a lesson in philosophy. In the dialogues, Plato describes Atlantis as a mighty naval empire beyond the Pillars of Hercules. It was rich and highly advanced, built with concentric rings of land and sea. But then came the hubris. The Atlanteans' moral and spiritual purity was diluted by their mortal mixture. They grew obsessed with conquest and domination, seeking to invade Greece and Egypt. This moral decay angered the gods. Plato sets up a morality play where the virtuous Proto-Athens stands firm, while Atlantis, decadent and prideful, loses the gods' favor. Zeus decided to punish them for their greed and hubris, and the entire civilization, ships, armies, temples, and people, was destroyed in a single day and night of fire and earthquakes, sinking into the sea forever. Mickey and the Beanstalk. Disney's Mickey and the Beanstalk starts out pretty grim. Mickey, Donald, and Goofy are starving to death. And yet Mickey trades their only cow for some beans, causing Donald to have a psychotic breakdown. Luckily, the beans are magical, and they grow into a beanstalk reaching up into the clouds. Here, they outsmart a giant and save their starving valley by returning the stolen golden harp. The original Jack and the Beanstalk is the same, but different. Jack is a poor boy who trades his family's only cow for some beans. His mother is surprisingly furious, that is, until a giant beanstalk grows from them and reaches into the sky. Jack climbs it and finds a massive house owned by a giant. He knocks on the door and is greeted by the giant's wife. She takes pity on him and feeds him, and she warns him to hide, because her husband eats children. When the giant returns, Jack hides in the oven, but the giant immediately senses him. The wife calms him down, casually explaining that he must be smelling the boy he had for dinner yesterday. The giant then eats several livestock, counts his gold, and falls asleep. Jack then sneaks out and steals the gold. After a while, he comes back and does it all again. This time, he steals a hen that lays golden eggs. Then, he returns a third time and steals the giant's golden harp. This time, the harp screams and wakes its master. The giant chases Jack down the beanstalk in a blind rage. Jack reaches the bottom, grabs an axe, and cuts the beanstalk down, and the giant falls to his death. Jack keeps all the treasure, and he and his mother becomes rich, and, as fairy tales tend to end, he eventually marries a princess. You know, because of money.
Fee, fi, fo, fum. I smell the blood of an Englishman.
Robin Hood. Disney's Robin Hood is the story of a charming fox outlaw who steals money from the thumb-sucking Prince John and gives it back to the poor. He woos Maid Marian, and the rightful king returns from a successful crusade. All is well. The movie is filled with talking animals who, due to extreme budget constraints, reuse a lot of the animation from the Jungle Book. In my opinion, it's one of the most underrated Disney films, and I watched it so much as a kid that the VHS quality disintegrated. But the real medieval Robin Hood, that story is not for children. In the earliest ballads from the 1400s, Robin Hood is a violent, short-tempered outlaw. His merry men are violent criminals who solves most problems by stabbing, clubbing, or straight-up murder. They have no trouble robbing and killing clergymen, and they literally kill a child witness in one of the earliest surviving tales. As you can tell, Robin frequently kills those who oppose him, including the corrupt sheriff of Nottingham, who he ambushes and beheads. And of course, sometimes he offs ordinary travelers who simply wandered too deep into Sherwood. Even the most famous traits we associate with him, like stealing from the rich to give to the poor, don't appear until the late 16th century. And the iconic arrow-splitting trick is an 18th century invention. In the earliest ballads, Maid Marian doesn't even exist. When she does finally appear centuries later, she's sometimes a sword-swinging warrior woman. Friar Tuck is also a late arrival, added long after Robin had stopped murdering clergymen in the stories. And the ending is not really Disney style either. The medieval Robin Hood dies betrayed, deliberately bled to death by a treacherous prioress, often said to be his own cousin. As he weakens, he shoots an arrow out the window. Wherever it lands, bury me there. Then he dies. The Great Mouse Detective. Disney's The Great Mouse Detective is essentially Sherlock Holmes with mice. Basil of Baker Street is Sherlock Holmes. Professor Ratigan is Professor Moriarty planning to replace the Queen with a robotic replica, seizing control of the country. The brilliant detective foils his plan, and the rat falls to his death, just like Moriarty. A classic story that, unlike the usual Disney fairy tales, is based on Victorian crime fiction. And Sherlock Holmes's world, written by Arthur Conan Doyle, can be unsurprisingly dark. Let's start off with Sherlock's substance abuse. Whenever he didn't have a case to solve, he was deeply into cocaine and morphine, trying to stimulate his brain, which was the style at the time. It was probably a smart choice that Disney had Basil play the violin and conduct chemistry experiments instead. Besides the cocaine addiction, Holmes can be pretty cold. In The Adventure of Charles Augustus Milverton, Holmes and Watson break into a blackmailer's home to steal incriminating letters. When the criminal is shot and left dying on the floor, Watson tries to help him, but Holmes physically restrains Watson and lets the man die, because he deserves to die. In general, a lot of the cases has pretty creepy themes. In The Sussex Vampire, a father believes his wife is drinking their baby's blood. In The Adventure of the Devil's Foot, victims are driven to literal madness and death by a toxic root that induces hallucinations of terror. And let's not forget the Hound of the Baskervilles. A starving dog is painted with phosphorus to look like a flaming demon used to literally scare a man to death. And beyond the crimes themselves, the world of Sherlock Holmes reflects some of the darkest themes from Victorian England. Extreme poverty, child exploitation, pseudosciences like phrenology, where people believed skull shapes determined a person's morality, casual racism and social cruelty that today feels disturbing and alien. Good thing Disney never included any of that stuff. Yeah.
Elementary, my dear Watson. This man has been dead for at least 2 hours. Moriarty isn't wasting any time.
You did it, you mad lad. You finished the whole video. Now, feel free to tell me exactly where I went wrong with my tier list, and why your objectively correct opinion is better than mine. You can also click on my head to subscribe for more videos, or click the next one if you somehow still want more of this. Thanks for watching. Cheers.